finish a sweater and technically it fits, but it's just not quite what you pictured? Maybe you wanted something cozy and roomy and it turned out snug, or you imagined a neat fitted sweater and it ended up sort of oversized. I've been there so many times, and over the years I've picked up a few little habits that really helped me knit sweaters that fit the way I wanted them to. So today I am sharing my best tips and tricks that helped me get the just right fit every time. Get comfy and let's dive in. Hi there and welcome to another video. My name is Luisa, but everybody calls me Lu. Today we are doing something a little different. Lately I've been looking back at some sweaters I knit a while ago and noticing how much I've changed the way I approach them. The way I read patterns, how I think about sizing, all those little things. I feel like I'm finally in a place where I can actually turn the picture I have in my head into a sweater on my needles, and I thought maybe you'd like to see how I do that. This video isn't about what you should and shouldn't do. I'm just sharing what's worked for me. Maybe you hear something that you want to try in your own knitting, who knows? Before we start, just one quick little thing. This isn't about body types or what shape looks best. It's about making sweaters that match what you imagine. If you love circular yokes but someone says they're not flattering, who cares? Wear what makes you feel happy and comfortable and pretty and what you enjoy knitting. There's nothing worse, I can tell you that, than working on something you don't love. Knitting is a hobby, so it's supposed to bring joy and relaxation and nothing else. Alright, with that said, let's talk sweater knitting. There are a few steps I always follow when working on sweaters, but before the actual knitting starts, there are a few things I always keep in the back of my mind to reference later, sort of like a go-to numbers. In order to have a picture in my mind of the perfect fit sweater, I need to know what that picture indeed entails in terms of numbers, and that's where the process starts. So the first thing I did, I guess I would say, is find out what I actually like to wear. I went over my closet and tried things on. Multiple sweaters and cardigans and all of that. I pulled out sweaters I reach for all the time and measured things like bust circumference, body length, sleeve length, armhole depth, everything that caught my eye. I try to do that for both lightweight and heavyweight sweaters because, as I found out later on, I prefer a little bit more positive ease with heavyweight sweaters and textured sweaters than I do with plain stockinette projects and lightweight pieces. For example, I have 4 different sweaters here with me to show you what I mean. The first one is a Belle and Sebastian pullover by Sari Nordlund. This is a all-over cable drop shoulder construction, worsted weight gauge. I just modified mine to have the cable on the sleeves here, starting at the top of my shoulders instead of a regular drop shoulder construction. So if you're wondering why mine doesn't look the same as the pattern photos, that's why. But this is a worsted weight gauge and I have around 15 centimeters of positive ease with this one. My second sweater here with me is the PetiteKnit sweater by Veronika Lindberg, and this is also an all-over cable project, but this is knitted in a DK weight gauge, and with this one I have around 10 centimeters of positive ease, so 10 centimeters with my balance, 10 centimeters with my PetiteKnit and 15 with my Belle and Sebastian. I really prefer having those 5 extra centimeters of positive ease. I've knitted my PetiteKnit before knitting the Belle and Sebastian, so I was a little bit more experienced, I guess I would say, when I was working on my Belle and Sebastian pullover, and I really love having those 5 extra centimeters of positive ease. I think it makes the whole difference when I am trying it on and looking at the mirror. I feel much more comfortable and relaxed with this fit, but this is for heavy textured knits. For lightweight, fingering weight, sometimes even DK weight projects that have no texture, they're just what? Plain stock net, I would say. Like I have here with me, it's backwards. This is the striped hype sweater, also by Veronika Lindberg. The pattern is originally written for a DK weight gauge, but I knitted mine in a fingering weight gauge, so my sweater here is much more lightweight in a thin fabric. Really lovely. I love wearing this, and I've just finished, so I guess I'm biased. But I'm in love with this sweater, and with this one I have around 10 centimeters of positive ease also, which is also the case for my Lyon sweater by PetiteKnit. This is a worsted weight construction. This is a worsted weight gauge, top-down construction. But with this one, it's plain stock net. I also have 10 centimeters of positive ease. And I love wearing both of my sweaters with 10 centimeters. I think if I had more, like 15, like I do with my Belle and Sebastian, it would maybe be too much and I wouldn't feel so comfortable as I do with 10 centimeters. So just to show you how my mind works sometimes when I think about how much ease I like to have with my sweaters. So then I compared those to my body measurements and suddenly I realized, oh, I really like having about 10 centimeters of positive ease. Or I prefer shorter or longer sweaters. Oh, I really love long sleeves that go all the way to my knuckles and things like that. That gave me a pretty clear picture of what my perfect fit actually is, instead of just following what a pattern says is the right fit. At that point, I knew my measurements and I also had a pretty good picture of my perfect fit sweater, my likes, my dislikes, and I could reference back every time I cast on a new sweater project. So from this point on is when things get more specific for each project I'm working on. So then I decided to cast on a new sweater. I have the yarn I'm going to use here with me and all of that. I'm ready to start. So the second step of my process was swatch. Here, if I could give an advice, I guess I would say don't trust your swatch, but swatch anyway. Now listen, I don't like swatching. It's a lot of precious knitting time spent on something that doesn't feel really important, but it is. I don't need a swatch to check my gauge. I do it to get to know the fabric. I don't try to match the pattern gauge exactly. If I end up having the same gauge, perfect. But if I don't, that's fine too. Gauge is such a personal thing. It depends on how you knit, the yarn you're using, your tension, the way you hold your yarn and your needles. I don't think there's much point in forcing it. I do try to get close to the pattern gauge, of course, but if I'm a couple of stitches off, it's okay. You will all be fine. My main goal is just to understand how the fabric works and behaves. I'm a tight knitter, so I usually size up my needles to come closer to matching the pattern gauge, and I always knit my swatch the same way my sweater is knitted, or any project for that matter. If my sweater is knit in the round, I knit my swatch in the round. Or I use a technique that mimics knitting in the round. If it's knit flat, then I swatch flat. And then I ask myself, do I like the way the stitches look? Do they seem too open, too tight, or do they seem just right? Am I happy with the fabric I'm getting? If I am, then I measure my gauge and then block my swatch to see how the fabric will behave and lay flat to dry. And this is something I've learned the hard way after knitting a few sweaters that ended up not fitting me, like the Birch Pullover by Andrea Mowry that I have here with me. This is one of my first sweaters, and I didn't really understand much about knitting at the time. Not that I do a lot now, but anyway, I know a little bit more than I did 2 years ago. This sweater is so small that as soon as I finished it, it went straight into my closet and it's been there ever since. But what I learned with this sweater was don't pin your swatch to the blocking mats, or at least that's what I found works best for me. I stretch my swatch, make it look nice and pretty, but I don't pin it. It doesn't matter if I have plain stockinette fabric or cables or lace or anything else. I never pin my swatches. I know a few people might not agree with me, but this is what works for me. Every so often I pick it up, give it a little tug here and there, stretch a little bit, and leave it to dry flat. From my experience, I feel like I never get an accurate measurement of my gauge if I pin my swatches, and I think my sweater knitting really improved once I stopped pinning them. And even then, going back to what I said a minute ago, I don't trust my swatches. Not when it comes to my gauge at least, but we'll talk more about that in a little bit. So, once my swatch is dry, I measure my gauge, of course, but my main focus is the fabric. I ask myself the same questions. Do I like the fabric? Is it too dense, too open? Do I like the softness of it? Is it scratchy? If there's something I'm not happy with, I try and fix that by changing my yarn, my needle size, whatever it is that is bothering me. And ideally, I guess I should knit and block a second swatch. But most of the time, I just change whatever I feel like needs changing and go ahead to casting on my project. I get impatient. But before I cast it on, I need to choose the size I'm going to knit, which is where step 3 comes in, which is choosing the right size in the pattern. Some people might not agree with me, but in my opinion, the ease suggested in the pattern is not important. I don't think it is. If my gauge matches the pattern, I choose the size based on the finished bust circumference and the amount of positive ease I am aiming for. That's when I look back at those favorite sweaters I've measured. They are my reference point for what feels just right for me and my body. Most of the time, I don't even know how much positive ease the pattern I'm knitting recommends. Sure, if I want a fit similar to what I see in the pattern photos, then I use that number as a reference. But now, if I didn't meet gauge, which is like 99% of the time, I find where in the pattern is the stitch count for the bust area and use those numbers to choose a size. Just a quick and easy, what's it called? Rule of 3? Or something like that. I know my gauge, so how many stitches I have in 10 centimeters or 4 inches. So in X number of stitches, how many centimeters of inches will I have? And I choose a size that gets me as close as possible to my desired bust measurement, which would be my chest measurement plus how much ease I want my sweater to have. Then I circle the size that matches my actual goal and go from there. That means sometimes I knit a size small in the pattern and sometimes I knit a size large or even 2XL depending on my gauge and how much ease I'm going for. And then usually by this point I get impatient and cast on my project. But before I get to any crucial or important section in the pattern, like separating for the sleeves, finishing the back panel and things like that, I always like to stop a bit and check a couple of things. And this is where I get into step 4 in this entire process. I really have a lot of steps. Step 4 would be checking schematic and Ravelry. Not all, but many patterns offer schematics with measurements for a few different sections of the final piece, like armhole depth, sleeve length, and things like that. So I always like to check it out and see if I want to make any modifications to a certain section, like shortening the armhole depth, lengthening the body, and that kind of thing based on the measurements I know I like and that I have written down as a reference during step 1 of the process. So that way I know I need to keep an eye out when I am knitting the yoke of a sweater, for example, because I want to shorten it by about 3 centimeters and things like that. Particularly when it comes to armhole depth, I also like to check the project pages on Ravelry from people who have knitted the same sweater before me and see if I like the fit on them, if they mentioned any modifications they made, and anything else I might find myself worrying about. I think is a wonderful resource to have and use. I don't know if I have a short upper body, shoulder area, or if I'm just too particular when it comes to the yoke of my sweaters, but I frequently find myself having to shorten the armhole depth of my sweater projects. So I'm always extra careful when I'm knitting the yoke so that I don't end up with something I know I won't like to wear in the end. And even then, sometimes I'm lazy or stubborn or I don't know what else. And I think, oh, that's okay. I don't need to change anything. It will all work itself out in the end. And later I found myself having to frog a good portion of a sweater because I didn't want to actually go through the trouble of having to make a couple of tweaks to the pattern to get the fit I'm picturing in my mind. And this is the case of my sweater number 15 I'm working on at the moment. I have just blocked this last night, so it's still a little bit damp, so I'm going to show you really quick because I don't want to hold it for too long. But I think you can already see the problem. Look at this armhole, it's so deep. When I was working on the back panel, this is a dropped shoulder top-down construction. So when I was first working on the back panel, I could clearly see that it was very likely going to be too long of a yoke, of a armhole. And I knew that. I checked other people's projects on Ravelry, and it confirmed my suspicions of an armhole being too deep for my liking, and I didn't do anything about it. I knitted the front, I joined it around, knitted a good section of the body, and now I'm all the way back here, almost ready to start working on the ribbing, and my armhole is too deep. I will have to go back and do some sort of sweater surgery to remove one or maybe even two cable repeats to shorten this armhole a little bit and make it at least closer to the fit I know I actually like. But yes, just to show you that sometimes I'm too stubborn to do the right thing. At least when it comes to the fit I know I like and wear. But why did I do that? I have no idea. As it is now, the underarm hits me around like where my bra is, and is a fit I definitely don't like. So if I could give another advice that I've learned along my years of knitting would be don't try to cut corners when it comes to fit. If you don't like the fit now, chances are you won't like it when it's finished, and then you either won't reach out to wear that sweater or you have a good amount of frogging in the future to fix whatever it is that's bothering you. I'm not saying modifying things in a pattern is something easy. Sometimes, when it is a simple design like a stockinette fabric or so, it is relatively easy enough to make a few tweaks here and there, but sometimes it is not that easy, like if it's a complicated construction or stitch pattern or any other design element. Yeah, sometimes it's a little bit of work. It can be tricky to make changes, yes, because it can mess with the stitch counts and things like that, but in my opinion, it is 100% worth the extra work and time to end up with something we really enjoy wearing in the end. Which brings me to step 5 in my perfect fit sweater process, which is try it on, multiple times. I am constantly trying on my sweaters, especially when I'm working on the yoke of a top-down sweater. There is so much going on around this section of a sweater with increases for the sleeves and shoulder shaping and neck shaping, and don't forget to keep an eye out for the length, at least in my case, but there's also the width. And if it's a top-down construction, like I said earlier, I don't trust my swatch when it comes to gauge, so I'm also being mindful of that, which means I am trying it on all the time to see if everything is looking like it should be. Oh, I need a sip of water. And if I can't try it on properly, like for example, if I just have a back panel done or something like that, I try to compare it to other sweaters I like to wear or go back to reference those measurements I've written down. That way, if something is not looking very promising, then at least it is easier to rip back a few rows and make tiny fixes instead of big ones later, like I have to do with my sweater number 15. Then, once I get past the separation for the sleeves and things are looking good, I relax a little bit and try it on when I'm close to reaching the desired length, or when I'm doing the sleeve decreases, or checking how easy it is to get the collar past my head and things like that. And try it on each side to the last step of knitting the fit I have in my mind process, which is blocking is my favorite friend. Oh yeah, I don't like blocking. It is a lot of time just watching the sweater dry on the blocking mats, but it's so important. Depending on the stitch pattern, blocking is extremely important to make cables and lace patterns bloom, for example, or when knitting with superwash yarn, which is notorious for going a lot with blocking. But I also think a mid project block is super important to see how the fit is looking like as I'm working on the sweater, and I also get a better measurement of my gauge. I have a larger piece of fabric to measure on. I can see if it will grow in length, for example, because with swatches it's such a small piece of fabric that sometimes a swatch doesn't grow with blocking, but the sweater does. Or at least it's what I experienced many times now. I would love to do those before and after blocking shots of a finished sweater to see all that transformation happening. It's really fun to see all the changes, but I can knit an entire sweater without a mid project block. It's too much of a risk in my opinion. I just can't do it. What if the armhole is too deep? Or the sleeve is too long? It would be so much work to go back and fix any issues. I would love to, but I can't do it. So I always do a couple of mid-project blocks as I work on the sweater to make sure I know how the fabric will behave once the sweater is done. I first do a mid-project block right after I get past the yoke. That way I can check the armhole depth, width, neck opening, get a better measurement of my gauge, and see if I'll need to change anything when I'm working on the body or the sleeves, especially if I'm knitting any kind of lace or cable pattern. I also like to do another block when I am close to reaching the final body length before I start working on the ribbing, just to make sure I have things right. And I do a third project block when my sleeve reach about the middle of my forearm. I found that sometimes, even if the body doesn't grow with blocking, the sleeve does. So that way I avoid having to rip back a few rows to get the length that I want. Maybe because it's a small circumference. I don't know, but this has happened to me many times now. And I also like to leave the collar to knit only after the upper body has been blocked. That way, if the fabric grows, I adapt my pickup rate accordingly and avoid having a tight or loose collar to get over my head or puckering around the collar or any other sort of issue. And even then, sometimes, even doing all of that and trying it on to get the right fit, frogging is bound to happen. It's part of the process of making things by hand, and there's nothing wrong with it. There's no rush, there's no right or wrong. It doesn't matter if even after all of the effort, the only way to get the fit we want is by frogging and basically starting over. It happens to every knitter, even if they don't tell us. Last week I had to basically frog the entire yoke of this wrap. This is the late summer wrap by Knitting for Olive that I'm currently working on, and I am making a modification to the button band here of the pattern, and I was doing something wrong. The body fabric here next to the button band, it was all puckered, it was terrible, it was looking terrible, and I just had to frog this. But because of the construction, I had to frog all the way back to my neckband here, so I basically started over, and well, I just saved 20 centimeters of my button band, of the neckband. But this is what happened to me, and that's okay, it happens, and I am way happier with this project now than I was before frogging it. I think the best part of knitting sweaters is that each one teaches you something new about what you actually want to wear. Once you start noticing those little patterns, the ease you like, the length that works, the yarns that behave the way you want them to, every new sweater gets closer and closer to what we picture in our head, and that is such a good feeling. I can tell you that. I love to hear in the comments your little fit secrets and what's made the biggest difference for you. If you could give one tip to your past self about sweater sizing, what would it be? I know mine would be, don't pin my swatches. I hope you liked today's video. I really loved sharing my fit process with you. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the podcast episodes I post here on the channel every 2 weeks. I would love if you gave this video a thumbs up. And until I see you in the next one, I wish you all the happiness with your knitting. Bye!